Right. So, hello everyone. My name is Abin. I'm your host for the Privacy Podcast, and today I have with me Patricia Thaine. She is the co-founder and CEO of Private AI. She attended the University of Toronto, and I believe she's put her PhD on hold in the pursuit of starting her new gig, Private AI. Her research
Thank you, Abin.
Her research is focused on privacy-preserving natural language processing and spoken language. So, hey Patricia, welcome to this Privacy Podcast.
Thank you so much, Abin. Pleasure to be here.
So, what did you tell me more about how you got started with privacy-preserving AI? Like what inspired you to transition from perhaps NLP to privacy-enhancing technologies?
For sure. So I started doing my PhD work on acoustic forensics. So who's speaking and recording, what kind of educational background they have, and other information that you could capture from voice that can help enhance the accuracy of automatic speech recognition systems. But it quickly became clear that while there was very highly good uses of these kinds of technologies, there were also very nefarious uses of these technologies. So started getting concerned by that, and also noticed that because of the concern for privacy and a well-warranted concern for privacy, a lot of technologists who build these models are often lacking data in order to make them work well. So it was a two-sided reason to jump into privacy. One, a legitimate concern over how much sensitive information natural language and spoken language processing algorithms end up needing to touch, and then being able to provide the right kind of data for engineers and researchers to actually be able to make good technology.
Right. So, could you tell me more about your company, Private AI, and what is it that your company is striving to achieve?
Our entire goal is to become the privacy layer for software, making it super easy for developers to integrate privacy regardless of what they're building, regardless of what data they're processing, and regardless of where they need to integrate the privacy. So core to being able to do this is being able to identify personally identifiable information as accurately as possible. So we're now the best system in the world for identifying and redacting personally identifiable information in unstructured data, so text, images, video, and we do this with very high efficiency and entirely in our customers' environments.
Wow. So, who's your target audience? Like, what I'm trying to ask is that, is your target audience anyone, an average Joe, or you're more tailored towards data scientists, data engineers, or the software developers?
Developers in general, including data scientists, including machine learning engineers, often the managers of machine learning teams, sometimes cybersecurity experts. It's really meant to be very horizontal.
All right. So, I believe you are kind of a business-facing enterprise, I believe.
That's right.
That's really good. So my next question is, what are the challenges to the privacy-oriented companies, particularly in Canada?
The challenges to the privacy-oriented companies in Canada. I think that they'd be very similar to the challenges of privacy-oriented companies in general. There is in particular, I think the ones that started earlier on in the process probably faced a bit more challenges because there was a less understanding of what privacy was, what kind of privacy technologies were required, whether they would become big companies. But more and more, we're starting to see privacy unicorns. So there's Big ID, for example. There's OneTrust. And I think now the main challenge is there are gaps that these companies aren't filling. And being able to explain that to investors of where those gaps are and why it's complementary and not competitive in nature, and why certain companies are better at closing those gaps than others, I think is probably one of the bigger challenges. Another aspect of it is developers who are really the ones who should be integrating privacy technologies into software pipelines still often face an educational hurdle in trying to decide what kind of privacy-enhancing technologies are right for them. So this hurdle is becoming smaller and smaller, and we're seeing much more build versus buy decisions rather than having to explain what privacy enhancing technologies are and why they're important. And I think that's only going to get better with time.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask you. Obviously, the 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 general public isn't really aware. I mean, this privacy enhancing technologies, these new the set of tools that actually were being developed, they actually came into the more of a public light after the establishment of GDPR and CCP, I believe, right? And right now, what I really think is that companies are not really innovating. The way I see it is they are trying to, circumvent around the laws, try not to get fined and stuff like that. But I truly believe that certain companies, such as, Open Mind, I mean, they're not really a company, they're kind of non-profit organization, kind of believe, which they're trying to lower the barrier, and they have done an exceptional job. And companies like yours, Private AI, they are actually trying not to circumvent the laws, but actually trying to, I believe, create solutions like running away from the laws, so trying to circumvent it around it. You are trying to solve problems. Now, that obviously the next natural question was, and you kind of partly answered it, but if you could elaborate on top of that. Obviously, when you go to the investors, they don't know. And obviously, by naturally, they shouldn't know. And how hard it is for them right now, for you, for companies like you, or a new company coming up, to explain to them what it is that you're trying to do and why they should invest in your company.
I think it depends on the background of the investors. A lot of the times, investors with a technology background completely understand that this is a problem and what the right solution is to the problem. And then if there are investors that come from more of a finance background, it's more about showing them, this is the growth. This is undeniable growth. So that it's about changing the way that you explain why it's a worthy investment, depending on their
That
background.
makes sense, yeah. So, right. So, I just want to ask you how to fight the legacy systems. Like, what would incentivize a potential customer or client, to switch to companies with, let's say, privacy by design or privacy in its core approach, when another company is offering more features, perhaps better ones, but not really solving the privacy issues? Do you really think the customer sentiment is strong enough to switch to companies who are bootstrapping but are having privacy in their core mission?
I think that there's undeniable growing awareness from consumers about the importance of privacy. And the worse things happen in the world, the more that awareness grows, unfortunately. Just this last week, because of the Roe v. Wade decision in the United States, a bunch of people are talking about deleting period apps, for example, so that they can't track whether or not a woman has had, or a person who can give birth has had an abortion. So whenever there is something dramatic like this that happens, people become more aware, and that transfers over to the awareness of why privacy is important in general, and an awareness that things can't always aren't always going to be rosy necessarily, and you have no idea when they're actually going to change. So the optimism of, if I have nothing to hide, then it doesn't matter if all of my information is available to be seen by corporations and government, is unfortunately dwindling away, but also very fortunately, because it will give companies that put privacy first more of an
Right.
advantage.
So actually, I was fortunate enough to get in touch with Professor Carl Adam from the University of Ottawa. So he actually mentioned a very good point, right? Most people, the average Joe, see privacy as a nice to have feature. They are more concerned about, and I guess rightly so, the average person is more concerned about the features, rather than privacy. Unless your unless your business is dependent on total privacy, like let's say Silk Road, right? But that is my next question. How would you like? There's something known as no free lunch theorem, right? So someone would have to pay for the privacy preserving techniques. Do you think the involvement of government would incentivize companies such as Private AI to build privacy preserving products that would reflect the privacy as the default nature in the digital sphere as it should have been all along?
Regulations, of course, play a huge role in adoption. The GDPR, for example, gave rise to a whole segment of technology that did not exist just 10 years ago, right? So, yes, governments play a huge role here. Policy is definitely one of the best ways to go when it comes to getting companies to adopt privacy. Ultimately, there is more of an understanding from companies that privacy is a big advantage. DuckDuckGo, for example, would not have gotten to its size had it not been tuning privacy. Signal and Telegram, also their advantages are privacy. And when you have that advantage, you do get that the base requirement of users to start growing the applications and then increasing those features, hopefully eventually to match those of the bigger
Yeah,
players.
but I'm struggling here, Patricia. Like, help me to understand this thing. For example, I'll talk about in India, okay? So I'm not really sure about the landscape and the user landscape in Canada, but what really happened, but we can extrapolate the thing, I believe. Why would I mean, what I've noticed is that people are very conservative when it comes to technology. They really don't want to change. They really don't want to switch to a better application when they are all offering privacy. So how would you, let's say Private AI, or any other company focused on privacy preserving computational techniques, incentivize customers? I'm not talking about businesses. Obviously, they do know. I mean, they will have to abide by GDPR, CCPA, or else they will be fine. But what about the average Joe? How would you incentivize them? Are you only dependent on some catastrophic events such as Roe v. Wade being overturned, or is there some kind of education that could be given to them, or some kind of marketing?
That's a great question. So I think one of the major benefits of the GDPR was actually also the educational benefits, because privacy started getting in the news more, and people started understanding what kind of rights they should expect from their data. I do think that catastrophic events are what really triggers people into action, but it does, because privacy is already in the vernacular of a lot of people. I wouldn't say necessarily the average Joe. That has already meant that companies with privacy integrated have had that competitive advantage. The kind of things that the average Joe would pay attention to, I think, are more catastrophic events.
So, correct me if I'm wrong. So basically, what you're trying to say is that there was a time when catastrophe was the only thing that would trigger people, but now there's more than that. There is some kind of push from the government side. Thank God for that. For people to realize how important their data is, and they should not be sold, right? So, I guess that's a very good point. And there's actually the reason I asked this question was because few weeks ago, I wrote an article which I share with you as well. Privacy is a right versus privacy is a product, right? So basically, and I got a lot of backlashes for that thing. So I guess most people misunderstood that. What I was trying to say is that they may have misunderstood that. I'm saying that privacy should not be as a right. No, I was particularly saying that privacy is a right, but someone will have to pay for it, right? So, like company like yours, right? So, we'll have to come up with products like with core privacy enhancing technologies, like perhaps let's say homomorphic encryption, or perhaps secure multi-party computation, right? So, the intent, what I was trying to say is that there is a payment that has to be done, and someone has to pay for it, right? So. And what I truly believe is, if companies do come and realize this thing, they will have an advantage over a market which is still unprecedented. And I'm really glad for you that you actually embarked on this journey. There is obviously first comers advantage to you. So yeah. congratulations for that. Well,
Yeah. I think that there's also starting to be an understanding that privacy is really important when it comes to maintaining cybersecurity. And companies are already ready to pay for cybersecurity because if there is a breach, that is a huge hit to their bottom line. Similar with privacy, if there is a privacy breach, that can be a huge hit to the bottom line.
right. So, as a privacy proponent, do you think that investors are going to bet on companies tailored towards privacy-preserving competing companies when they're offering a similar product that already exists in the market, perhaps with lots and lots of customers already, right? So, I mean, do you really think that the investors would want to stay away from a new company if they don't necessarily offer better features?
I think ultimately investors are going to be looking at growth, and so you'll get enthusiasts who will put money probably because they believe in the technology early on in pre-seed and seed, and then afterwards it's about showing there is a market here. We're not crazy.
So, with an extension to this thing, I believe Canada is up and coming. I guess I last year, or perhaps at the start of this year, I attended TROPT, right? So the Rise of Privacy Technologies, their seminar, and what I realized there was the majority of the market, the majority of the companies are located based out of the US and Europe, and from Canada, there were not many, like literally not many. Right. So, as unfortunate as it sounds, what do you think? Like, which provinces are like more focused on this thing? Because there was one person in that webinar who was from Quebec, and he was—I don't remember the name of the startup that he was working on, unfortunately. But what I realized was Quebec as a province, or investors from Quebec, I believe, are focusing on this issue. Right. So my question is, which provinces are actually putting money? Perhaps this is a very loose question, but you can answer it any way that you see fit. Which provinces, I mean, if you want to start a new gig in Canada, which provinces should you go, or should you go looking for investors in?
I'd say there are good investors across the country, but Toronto is the main financial hub. One thing to note is that Quebec had Bill 64 pass, which is a major privacy legislation. And so it'll be really interesting to see what other companies come out of there as a result of Bill C64, Bill 64, not C64. But also keep in mind, comparatively, Canada has a population of 37-ish million people. So we will always have fewer companies than the US or Europe. But in terms of privacy companies, there's, for example, Cape Privacy out of Halifax that works on secure multi-party computation. There's Shield Crypto Systems, which I believe they changed their name, and they work on homomorphic encryption. That's in Toronto. There's some excellent companies out of Toronto also working on allowing for data discovery in a much more easy way. So there are privacy companies out there in Canada, and I think proportionally speaking to the population, it's probably a decent
Frankly
amount.
speaking, yeah, you're truly right. It's not a fair comparison when you're comparing 37 million folks against 360 million folks in the US. Right? So it's not really fair, but I do believe what you said is right. So yeah. Building on top of this thing, you just mentioned a few privacy enhancing technologies, and by the way, you are in every right to refuse to answer this next question. Which private AI, which all pets do you work on, and in which, perhaps, what is the application? So I'm not asking for obviously this is something confidential, but just a general idea. So if someone from perhaps an investor watching this, you want to answer keeping that in mind.
So what applications is our technologies used for?
That's the second part of the question. First part of the question, which all privacy enhancing technologies does private AI use?
Okay. So we use de-identification And the way that we do that is through redaction and through replacement of person-identifiable information with natural-looking PII. And some use cases, for example, are if you want to train a chatbot, you want to prevent that chatbot from memorizing the personal information. And so you can, excuse me, replace the names with fake names, locations with fake locations, and therefore you are preventing the model from memorizing something that isn't there, but also preventing downstream model accuracy loss because you still fed it natural-looking data. Other examples of where we're used are for better data discovery, because we have such high accuracy when it comes to unstructured data. And if you're using a data loss prevention provider, a lot of the times they're using things like regular expressions, and that does not generalize well when it comes to really messy text, for example. Other use cases are for sharing data internally. For example, customer service data or HR data. If you want your machine learning teams to use it, or if you want some insights from the data and you want to share the data across teams within an organization, oftentimes a CISO or a DPO will say no because there is person-identifiable information within here. Other use cases are for being able to access more customer information. So we have companies that need to they have contractual obligations to remove the person-identifiable information from their customers' data before they get access to it to make their products better. So there are a wide range of use cases, and we're still discovering more.
So actually, I have a bone to pick with you. You know, I actually read one of your papers, and I guess forgive me, I don't remember the name. You presented it with Professor Gerald Onley. And there you had mentioned about the 4 pillars of privacy, input privacy, output privacy. Forgive me, I forgot the 2 other names. But,
Preserving AI?
I'm sorry?
Privacy preserving AI?
Privacy preserving AI, but there were 4 pillars you mentioned: input, output privacy, and for some input verification, I believe, or I could be wrong though, but there were 4 pillars.
Training data privacy, input and output privacy, and model privacy.
Model privacy, yeah. So that, and there was one more paper that I read that it mentioned that pseudonymization and redacting information and replacing, let's say, Abin is a man with, Manuel is a man, you're changing my name. You're still using a man's name, I believe, right? So what I've read is that according to papers, pseudonymization may not be the best option. So, why not? What I'm struggling to find an answer is why to go with pseudonymization? Like, if it is not, the best, so to speak, there must be a reason, right?
It's not the best. Please expand. Why isn't it the best?
What I've read, okay, so I could be wrong though, so because I'm also still trying to find answers to this thing. But what I read was, for example, if you're talking about differential privacy, so you're essentially adding noise to the data, right? And you can control the amount of noise with epsilon, right? So, but with let's say, replacing a man's name with another man's name, or like pseudonymization, that's what I believe. Do you think that it is perhaps an attacker would be able to still get an idea about what the person's metadata might be? So that is why I was struggling to understand: is it the best, or is there a gap in my knowledge? Like, please, I would love to be educated from you.
Okay, so here's the concern. The concern that often that has happened in production in real life is these models end up memorizing information like usernames, like names, like addresses, and that very specific information is what you're trying to get the model to not memorize, because then it'll get spewed out in production. But you still want it to learn how language works in general, right? Or generalizations, or be able to make generalizations about things. So when you're removing the data, it can't memorize it. It's gone, right? So in that sense, there's no longer a concern there of your name being memorized and it being associated with your address, for example.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense.
When it comes to when it comes to differential privacy, uh, very good technology, very interesting. You get mathematical guarantees of worst case scenarios, which is awesome. But the problem there are a few problems. One, in order to get high enough model accuracy, you often need the kinds of resources that Google and Microsoft have. If you're an average machine learning engineer, you're not going to be able to get access to the ton of TPUs that it requires to train the models using differential privacy while still maintaining a reasonable amount of machine model accuracy. The other thing about differential privacy is that it is meant to make generalizations about a population. So the populations that are underrepresented, they don't their information also does not get represented by the model when you're using differential privacy. It gets even worse. So where PII removal and replacement comes in handy is also being able to have more control over what it is that you keep. Do you want to keep religions? Do you want to keep origins? Do you want to keep information that's a quasi-identifier, but will still give you some idea of these underrepresented populations while preventing very unique individual information from being memorized? There's still a really good place for differential privacy, and you can use it, for example, for generating a bunch of synthetic information, but you also should use PII detection to identify what kind of PII may, just in case, have been memorized by the model, even though you're using differential privacy, and see whether that data is corresponding anywhere in your original data set. So I don't think differential privacy is accessible to the average engineer. It also requires an understanding of the mathematics behind it in order to make sure that you've set the right epsilon or the right delta, for example, and it doesn't leave you as much control as replacing the parts of the PII or quasi-identifiers that you actually need to replace.
So actually, that is quite true, so to speak. So my next question is, it is a hot topic, privacy. Perhaps, I guess, I read somewhere that in 2021 it was the hottest topic, people remember. And there aren't a lot of players in this field when compared to other niche of AI like computer vision, NLP, so on and so forth. What do you think the future of privacy-preserving AI companies look like in North America, and by extension the world?
Mm-hmm. So I think one thing about privacy enhancing technologies is that they can be pretty complex. There aren't many people who truly understand them, and the other point is that they often don't generalize well. So if you wanted to build something with homomorphic encryption or secure multi-party computation, and you wanted to create something that was generalizable across a vertical even, it's very difficult to do because anytime you want to make a change to a circuit, you need to change the entire circuit or the entire algorithm in some cases.
MLOps,
yeah. Except even more so when it comes to something like secure multi-party computation, because every bit of the circuit interacts in a specific way. So the problem with privacy enhancing technology companies will face is being able to create technologies that are not just one-shot products for one particular company or one small segment of the companies that are out there. So generalizability, and also finding the talent that can build the technologies. Because there is a lot of talent out there now for AI, which is probably one of the reasons why you see so many NLP companies and computer vision companies coming out. But there isn't a big talent pool when it comes to people who understand how to build privacy-enhancing technologies. So these companies often have to train people themselves, right? And you have to find people who are willing to learn these very complicated things. So,
So you said that there aren't enough talents, right? So are you talking about academicians or engineers?
and not enough engineers who understand how to build privacy-enhancing technologies. And some of them may come from academia, some of them may come from industry or have learned themselves.
So yeah, breathing life into what you already know and building a product using that knowledge. I guess that's what you're saying, is that there isn't enough, right? So what do you think what do you think could be done to solve this problem? This is a major problem. It's a very serious problem.
I think that one reason why AI became more easy to learn is the massive amounts of resources out there, but also the really excellent libraries out there for people to play around with, right? And you'll still find that a lot of people who apply for machine learning jobs will be applying because they've played around with PyTorch or TensorFlow, but they might not necessarily understand the nitty-gritty. But in some cases, that's enough. In some cases, it's not. It depends what kind of job they need to fill. For creating privacy-enhancing technologies using homomorphic encryption or secure multi-party computation or differential privacy, or if you want to understand the re-identification risk scoring, that requires a kind of training that takes several years to learn. There aren't that many courses out there for this, and excuse me. And when you learn it, it's the libraries out there. There are some very good ones, but they're still not to the point where PyTorch or TensorFlow are. So I think the major thing that needs to be bridged is that educational gap, the resource gap for privacy-enhancing technologies.
So I guess what are the best ways? Courses, blogs, or everything? Like whatever is possible.
Everything. Anything possible.
Well, thank you so much. So this, segment is the few rapid-fire questions. So you'll have to answer very, very quickly, whatever comes to your mind. Okay? Nobody's going to judge you. It's all you and me and people who's going to watch this. Okay? So here goes. Industry or academia?
Personally, industry.
Sales team or engineering team?
You need both.
Okay. Your favorite privacy-enhancing technology?
De-identification.
The most mature privacy-enhancing technology according to you?
Either probably differential privacy for structured data.
And the least mature privacy-enhancing technology according to you?
That's a tough one. Maybe homomorphic encryption.
I suppose you
but
answer that.
because it's extremely difficult
Plus,
to make advances in
the
that.
computational overhead is pretty high, I believe. Yeah, that's a good answer. And perhaps the most controversial question I'm going to ask you is that pro-metaverse or anti-metaverse? Wow.
Pro-metaverse. As long as there's privacy.
Yeah, definitely. And with this one last question, if you were to finish your autobiography with one sentence, what would that be?
Hopefully did more good than harm.
Impressive. Play safe, but yeah, impressive. So, thank you, Patricia. Folks, that was Patricia with us. She's been lovely to come here and share her thoughts with us. So yeah, thank you, Patricia, for coming over here. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Avon. Appreciate it.